Open. Bella did not explode. Normally, maybe she's holding it in. Um,
I'm too tired.
yeah, that's great. Welcome back to the Husky Women's Hoop Show. Um, unfortunately, we don't have wins to talk about. They're close games, if you take solace in that. We got a few things to talk about this week. It was nice to see some folks react really positively to this show. We had requests to do a show after the Oregon game, but this is more so meant to be like a weekly thing as opposed to a per game, which I mean, it would be cool, but it's just like if it was super mega popular, then yeah, maybe. Um, Washington continues to be in an interesting situation as we've got now 4 games left in the NCAA regular season. I don't know why I said it like that. I'm used to saying it like WNBA regular season, but it just feels wrong to say it like that. Two critical games for the Huskies over the past week. We'll talk a little bit about the backcourt. I wanted to talk about Xavier Sellers and Eladine last week, but it kind of got lost. Delia Daniels has played a big impact, and despite what Kiki Iriafin's uh, response was to me, I want to talk about her versatility and importance. And then obviously we'll look at the remaining schedule for Washington as each game remains ever important, starting tomorrow, goodness gracious, against the Rutgers Scarlet Knights. So, first of all, we'll look at those last 2 games, Oregon and USC, a little bit of Pac-12 flavor for you. Oh gosh, as both Rowan and Bella know, this game really upset me. I just don't like Oregon in general. For just growing up in purple, going to the school, and then obviously how important this game was, right? You know, Oregon sat several spots above Washington in the Big Ten standings and still does, of course. And this was a critical game on the road. This was a tough. It came down to the last shot. Devin Coppinger got a pretty decent look. I think we all agree it was a pretty decent look. Um, from the mid range, couldn't get it to go. Xavier Sellers had fouled out of this one, so I'm sure you would have liked to see her get the shot. Foul trouble has been a discussion. I think we've all talked about it in here or with Tina. It was talked about in yesterday's weekly press conference with Coach Langley. Um, just, when you have, I don't think it's arguable. I think she's their best player this year, right? I don't think there's any debate with that. When you want your best player on the court, right? I mean, it was largely even if you look at the quarter by quarter breakdown. Washington leads by 1 after the first frame. They lead by 4 after the second. So you go into halftime feeling pretty good, right? But knowing that there's more work to be done, you lose this third quarter by 2, and then Oregon outscores you by 4 in the final frame, and you drop the last one, despite Washington making 6 of the last 7 field goals. Deja Kelly played a big role in this one. I have to get her name really was fascinating. Mevius for Oregon played a big role in this one, 14 points, but Deja Kelly led the way with 21. On the Washington side of things, Xavier Sellers 21 points, but obviously again fouled out, so that was a big factor. Delia Daniels 17, El Ladine 16, and outside of Hannah Steins' 7, it was really quiet in terms of scoring. Besides that, we'll pop into this quickly because then we'll talk about the USC game, which was bigger. Um, Bella, because you were texting me during this one, I want to hear your thoughts because this is a tough one. I mean, Oregon's not a bad team by any means, but Washington had this one per se, right? And then Rowan, I'd love to hear from you as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the reason it was so frustrating was because it was so close. Like the whole game, it didn't feel like the win was in the bag by any means, but it did feel like it was theirs to lose. Um, I think it's particularly a bummer when Xavier Sellers fouls out. If you look ahead a little bit at the USC game, when they were trying to get buckets at the end, it was Xavier faking and driving to the bucket or hitting a three. Like she is your shot maker. Not that other players can't, but I think, your number one choice, particularly if you're trying to hit a three. But it was frustrating because it was what we had talked about last week, where maybe they got some of the defensive stops, but then they needed a bucket and they couldn't get the bucket. And that's no disrespect to Devin, I think it's tough to come in as a freshman. And I think she had played some, but she hadn't really played much right up to that point that she got the shot. Like, that's a really tough position to come into. That's not an easy shot to hit. It was a good open shot, but also like mid-range isn't necessarily her forte as far as I know. Like she's a bit more of a three-point shooter, a bit more of a driver. Um, so I'm wondering what the option was there, like what they were looking for. And it was interesting to hear after the USC game, and I asked Savia Sellers basically about struggling to make those shots down the stretch. Um, and she didn't have much to say other than, yeah, we got to make those shots. Like, it doesn't seem like there's anything particularly that they feel is mentally in the way. Um, but they know that there's something missing there. Like, they can recognize that they are getting so close and they are getting there, but maybe it's, not having the experience of a is she a fifth year senior, Deja Kelly? Is she a graduate student? I don't remember. She's in her fourth or fifth year. Like, yeah, I think her fifth year, like very, very experienced player getting those buckets down the stretch for Oregon. And UW, you have Delia Daniels, but she's not really um she doesn't create her own shot as much as a Deja Kelly or Savia Sellers does. So maybe that's where like a little bit of Washington's youth comes into play. But yeah, it was just a bummer to see them get so close and like not be super bothered by, the 6'8" presence of Felice and do a pretty good job of guarding the players. And they held Deja Kelly down for a little while and then she just went off. You could not stop her mid-range for anything. So it was just it was a bummer just because, it would have been a huge relief in a way for them to win, and they need it in the standings.
Yeah, I mean, as expected, we talked about it last week. We were expecting it to be close and competitive the whole time, but it's so hard because I'm like, the three of us have talked about this. Which is better, winning or losing a game by like 1 or 2 points to someone that you could actually beat, or losing by 1 or 2 points to a team that you're not supposed to beat. So, again, looking ahead to the USC game. But I mean, really with both games, everyone's mentioned before, the fouling is just a huge issue, and you keep ending up in these down to the wire games where, against Oregon, Sabia fouled out, Delia had three, and then USC both, again, looking ahead, we'll talk about it, but Sabia and Delia also, both fouled out. That's huge. Those are, arguably your two best players if you're talking about different positions. And yeah, with Oregon, I mean, it's that thing where when you're so close in the standings, especially, again, we've mentioned it before, in a conference that you need to win a certain amount of games to be able to even get into the conference tournament. And then I'm sure we're going to discuss this as well, but seeing that UW is on the radar of Charlie Creme Cream, who none of us know how to pronounce. These games are important, and I think a statement win, like we were talking about with a USC, a UCLA, is huge. But you're also not going to be looked at if you can't beat a middle of the conference team like Oregon, and so that just would have been a really helpful win that maybe not wouldn't have had a lot of eyes on them, but in the long run is would be huge. So we know that they play them in at home March 2nd, I believe. So that'll be a time where they really need to, pull that one out, because these next few, sorry, I keep going to all these things we're going to be talking about later. The Oregon game, I mean, just in general, I think 21 from Savia, 17.6 rebounds from Delia, and then 16 points and 7 rebounds from L. That's huge. That's, your big three, really consistent. And I think that's the best that they could do. And again, it brings up the question of how are they going to figure out how to end close games, and that can be talked about with teams like an Oregon, teams like a UCLA, a USC. It's all an issue. And now we're starting to see that not only is it shot selection, it's also how do you avoid fouls to be able to even have a shot to find selection four and in the last final minute. So, yeah, I think it's going to be huge for them to try and win against Oregon in their final game to try and have a shot at making, Big Ten tournament and the NCAA tournament. And yeah, it's just so many down to the wire games. It's getting our heart rate up. Like,
It was funny. Yesterday we did our Storm roundtable after the Talisa Ray and Noel Quinn press conference, and Rowan kept like giving me lobs for the the next segment. So you're doing well at the segues if that's your intent.
okay, well,
Um, yeah, no, I think you both bring up great points. Like just how close it was and the importance of taking care of business, essentially, is how I look at those games that aren't like the big heavyweights per se. It's taking care of business. And you got close, but you didn't seal the deal. Then that's all it's gonna, well, I don't know how the folks who decide who gets in look at things. I don't know if they just look at it as its own, just the result on paper, or if they look at how that game was played. Anyway, we'll talk about that more as mentioned with Charlie Cream, whatever, the
I think
bracketology fella.
I think it's Cream because he works for ESPN and the ESPN announcers always say Cream. So
We're gonna go with the cream guy. All right. Yeah, so that was tough. And then, going into the USC game, I think it's fair to say, without quoting what was said between us, that there was considerable doubt going into the USC game. I don't think that's unreasonable, right? I mean, USC had been a strong team all year. Obviously, you look at Juju and Kiki, and they've got great recruiting classes. Like they're a top to bottom strong program, right? And they had come off beating UCLA, which is your number one team in the country. Um, Again, considerable doubt. I I don't think it's unfair to say that. And then we get into this game, and Washington holds the lead, as Bella pointed out to me as we left not Husky, Alaska Airlines Arena. Washington led for 27 minutes of this game, and I try to not get too high, too low, right? I thought they were doing it. I really thought like first quarter, two, oops, I'm out of focus. Hello. There we go. First quarter, you can't, I'm not basing anything off that, right? You go to the second half after a weird second quarter that was a really, really strong defense. I was talking to Bella about something. I look up and there's like 2 minutes and 30 seconds left, and they're around 20 points each. I said, what the hell is happening here? Like neither team could buy a bucket, but the thing like that's normally we've seen Washington go on these droughts in the second quarter, right? And it's been detrimental to them down the stretch because they have to dig themselves out of that issue. USC wasn't scoring either. So it was like you are like whether it be luck or your defensive prowess, which we've heard Tina talk about how they've played defensively throughout the course of the season, like you were in a great scenario going into half. You ended up tied. That's fine. I'll take Washington tied against the top team in the country any day. Like the trends, I took screenshots of the trends going into the half. Washington missed their last four field goals. They'd made one of their last nine. They'd gone scoreless over the last 3:30 of the half. But USC hadn't made a field goal over the last 4 minutes and 37 seconds. So, things felt good basically until the fourth quarter, right? Even after the end of the third, like I tweeted about it, and then the gambling account got mad at me. I'm not going to talk about that. Um,
except that you just did.
Whatever, Bella. Um, I
I'm
was
not going to
like,
talk about
hey,
it right after
the
I bring it up.
Huskies have gotten themselves into these scenarios going into the final frame where they've been around with the best teams in the country and or teams who are really, really positive in the net ratings rankings in this country. I don't know why I say in this country. Um, can they do it now? Like this is your signature win, especially since we talked about it last week. I was like, I'm throwing myself the lob here to be able to, put down after the game. And then and then there were some big runs by some Trojan players and some interesting final looks towards the end of the game, and Washington wasn't able to hit them. And I mean, Savia had a really strong fourth quarter. I know she was, I think, around 20 points in the fourth quarter alone. Um, just wasn't enough. Even we talked about foul trouble, and I know Bella's ready to go. Um, both
Usually.
Savia and Alea, I think, were right on the cusp of fouling out. So that was a worry too.
I have the
Um,
timestamps if you need the
oh
timestamps.
no, I know Rowan's ready too. You guys are both ready. So as I kind of forgot in the essence of fairness yesterday, I went Christian twice in a row. First in a row. Oh, first twice in a row. Um, Rowan, bring out those timestamps.
Sorry, Bella.
Like
But what if
Okay.
I have such a good point? No, go ahead.
you both are gonna have great points. So that's like the whole reason we do the show. Um, this is it was a heartbreaker,
It
but
was.
yeah, go ahead.
Well, I mean, first of all, honestly, I know we were talking after the Oregon game about doubting, but I honestly was kind of thinking, like, knowing the trend, I kind of knew this was going to be a good game, just knowing again that against teams that maybe they shouldn't struggle against, they struggle against, and against the teams that they should struggle against, they don't. So I was looking forward to this game thinking that it was going to be close and then, maybe they'd pull away at the end. But yeah, I mean, it really was a heartbreaker. It was just the energy and the arena was so good. Everyone, it felt like was hitting their shots in the beginning. It was just like great, 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 great game. Um, I mean, I think my main thing that I had taking away from it is just, I mean, again, the fouling, but with the fouling, just subbing, like the time of substitutes. And, I think it's hard when we're talking about people that shouldn't have been in the game at at this time or should have been in the game in that time. And, we all understand different people have different days where they have their games. And, we've seen Tyra have some really great games and be able to defend some really key people. But I went through and looked at the timestamps and, Delia picked up her fourth foul with about, it said 2:56 to go and immediately was subbed out. And then and at that point, USC only had a 1 point lead. And then it was immediate and one for Kiki Iriafen. And then Tyra turned the ball over. And then it was a steal by Kiki to a fast break layup. And it just snowballed and snowballed and snowballed. And, I understand when you have a game that close, I'm sure maybe Tina Langley was thinking, let's save Delia for if we go into overtime, we'll need her then. But it's just so difficult. And, so then she subbed back in with 1 minute left when USC has a 5 point advantage. And now you're having to dig yourself out of that hole. And, we give Savia Sellers a lot of praise and as she should, as we should. But I also think that, Delia has really, I feel like been very underrated in the way that she has been able to score and defend, some of the top people in the country. You're on Kiki Iriafen, and yes, yesterday I did say that I think I have a suspicion of who the Storm's third round pick is going to be. We'll see. We'll see. Anyway, and I just think in a moment like that, it's really risky to take her out. Yes, she had four, but you're so close to beating this big team. I think I would have just said, let's go with it. Please be careful. But that honestly to me is what feels like it lost the game for them is just, a substitution when Delia was doing so well. So anyway, that's, we'll see if any of that changes in the future. But I mean, that's huge to be kind of nervous about what's happening with Savia and Delia at the same time, and having to kind of figure out if you keep them in or not. So, Savia, again, with the Savia Sellers praise, she, hit a three to, get them back in the realm of being able to win with a few seconds left. But overall, I mean, I just think that the whole game was defensively great until the end. And I know that, it was asked in presser, what is the problem? Why is the end of game execution just not working? And of course, you can't point to one thing, but I think that it felt like I noticed in the third, fourth quarter, El Ladine being a little bit like she was always the one that was kind of having to recover from, some defense not some coverage not working, and I think it was just defense got a little sloppy, so then that leads to more fouls, and then you just don't have a chance to finish it at the end. And to your point, one last thing, to your point about Devin Coppinger too, I know we've talked about, who should be in that starting lineup spot. I know we've talked about Chloe Briggs, Devin Coppinger, and not even about the starting spot, just having people. I think bench points has been a big problem recently. And I think Devin's been great. And you're right, she had a really great look at the end at Oregon. And I just think, unfortunately, if you have players like Savia and Delia who continually get into foul trouble, you really need to make sure that you are using your players wisely and using the bench wisely. So that's fine.
Yeah, that's honestly like half of my main point is I feel like the USC game exposed more than some other games have the lack of depth that Washington has. Not only were USC able to rest players like Kiki Iriafen and Rhea Marshall, Talia von Oelhoffen, I mean, really everyone except for Juju, I want to say, like had more like mid 20s to high 20s minutes instead of the 38 that Juju played or something like that. And so, I mean, I think Rhea Marshall and Kiki Arafin played barely any of like the third quarter and then like came in partway through the fourth quarter and they felt like energized, ready to go. They were running and it felt like UW was slowing down. They were getting tired. So not only like does USC have the depth to be able to rest some of their players throughout the game, they also have the depth if there's foul trouble. And they have, different contributors. Like you could take Talia von Oelhoffen off or Kennedy Smith and you bring in an Avery Howell or a Kaylin Heckel and, are they going to score a ton of points? No, but they're very consistent contributors. Clarissa Akunwafo, I believe, their sort of backup big, like she's had some really influential minutes. They have a really great freshman. And so it was just like UW was just outmatched in terms of what was available. And that's, part of why some like Savia and Delia fouling out is such a big problem, right? If you're at South Carolina and you have, say, Tahina Pau foul out, okay, you still have Raven Johnson and Malaysia Fulwiley and Tessa Johnson coming off your bench, right? Like, and obviously Washington's not going to have the depth of a South Carolina. Very few teams do, but it can really kill teams that are sort of the underdogs if they can't mentally and physically play those 40 minutes with basically the same five players. Because beyond just like not really having a ton of depth, there's also not really a clear like sixth player of the year impact off the bench. And I feel like last year as a freshman, it was very clearly Savia Sellers. Obviously, she moved into the starting role eventually, but like for a while, it was very clear that she was the person coming off the bench and impacting the game. Same way I think like a Mylasia Fulwiley or a Tessa Johnson or literally any of South Carolina's bench do. Clearly, I watch a lot of South Carolina. But there's just there's they have good, strong starting pieces, and then beyond that, it hasn't quite come together consistently enough. And I think the problem with that is just that there's only so much you can do to fix that this late in the season. You can't suddenly get those players more minutes than they've had. I think we've seen Devin Coppinger's minutes increase, and I like that. I think her minutes have been very good. I think she is the closest to being like your impact six player of the year, off the bench in terms of like bringing defensive energy and, playing within the system and taking her shots when she's open. Um, but it's just not quite the same. And, particularly with the defense that they were playing, it required a lot of doubling and tripling of either the posts, Kiki Arifin and Ray Marshall when the ball was down low, or even Juju Watkins on the perimeter. And it's hard to double a player on the perimeter. Like it's one thing if you have a player down in the post and you're kind of like coming off of your mark a little bit to swipe at the ball, but you're moving players around a lot in the defensive scheme, and it also relied on leaving some wide open three-point shooters. And eventually, in the fourth quarter, they made those three-point shots. So I think, and that's one of those things that was clearly a tactical decision by Tina. You have to, you know what your disadvantages are, and you have to kind of make a plan and hope for the best to some extent. And that's what Lindsay Gottlieb talked about after the fact was their plan required leaving certain players open, and once those players, particularly I think it was Kenny Smith and Caitlin Heckel, started hitting those shots, then you're screwed a little bit because you can't really change your system, and you just it's just and it tires you out. So it was a I think given the circumstances, they played fantastic. I think the team should, there's so many things to be proud of from that game. Juju Watkins was incredibly inefficient. Kiki Iriafen was mostly effective at the end of the game. Like there was a lot of really, really good things that they did. And it was just, it really felt like one of those situations where just like the underdog did not have enough to take over, the team that had the advantage. And it's not like it's just not something there's an easy fix for. It's just tough.
Can I add some things to drive the point home?
Oh
I
God,
thought it
no,
was
absolutely not. How dare you?
I thought it was interesting. I'm looking at the box and I was looking at it this morning, but now that I look at it, it's like, okay, Savia, this is for
Yep.
USC. Savia 38, L 36. So all the starters had above 30 minutes. Next is Tyra with 19, then four
Hmm.
for Devin Coppinger, and then 0+ for Tegan Brown, which basically means she was in for, seconds. But that's just so fascinating to see it so clear starters and then, throwing Tyra in there. I mean, again, Delia has, and again, I hate to ever say anything like this because it's really hard to say anything negative about any player. I always feel bad, but it's kind of difficult because Delia is kind of taking all of the post responsibility defensively. And the issue is that I think Tyra's had some really great looks defensively, and done a really good job on some players, but the issue is that she can't convert offensively. And I think it's the same. I mean, with Brenna McDonald, the only other post available at the moment, it's unfortunately, I don't feel like she brings enough on either side to really truly be someone that can come in and give Delia some, a little bit of a break. And we've talked about Olivia Anderson, who we now know is out for the rest of the season, unfortunately. And, we don't really know what she would have brought necessarily, but that depth is important because Delia's having to guard Kiki Iriafen and Rhea Marshall at the same time. And, I think that that's honestly one of the biggest issues right now. And then, I guess, is that all I was going to say? I think that is all I was going to say. But I agree that for what it was, I think it was incredible to really reflect on, okay, so Tyra was only in 19 minutes and Delia played, most of the time on two, really strong posts, and she still was able to score 10 points as well. And it wasn't just a defensive effort, it was also she was converting on offense as well. So Delia Daniels praise is always today.
The thing about Tyra Eke is I actually feel like she's very good at playing as a traditional post.
Mhm.
Like she will get in those pick and roll situations. If she gets position, she generally finishes around the basket. I think what's tough is that Washington wants to spread the floor kind of as much as possible, and she doesn't do that. She's a very good screener, and I think she's done a really good job of getting some three-point shooters open at times. So I actually don't have I don't have major issues with what she brings offensively, but I think defensively she's not quite consistent yet. And so, she'll kind of pick up fouls that she shouldn't, and sometimes the rebounding isn't quite there, and it's like you want just a little bit more from her for, if you're gonna put a player on that doesn't space the floor in a system where you kind of need to space the floor, you want to get a little bit more defensively out of her than you are.
Mhm.
I feel like that's kind of where my brain is at, and that's why she's been going with the four guard lineup, right? Because
Right.
Delia can help space the floor, and she can play as a traditional post, and she's good defensively, and you're not really. I think in a lot of cases, Tina Langley thinks that you're not losing as much defensively if you have four guards because you can sort of, switch around and you can, sort of blitz and whatever. Um, so it's an interesting situation, particularly like looking at the Rutgers game, because I feel like it's another team where they don't necessarily have the most. I think their post player is generally Destiny Adams, and she's the same height as Delia Daniels and a very similar type player where like it's her kind of speed and her variety of finishes. So I think that'll be a really great matchup, and it'll be interesting to see how the rest of the team matches up and if Tyra sort of fits into defending that team at all. Because it feels like most of the time when she is defending, it's to defend a very traditional post like a Lauren Betts or someone, Philly Chase, someone who really is just trying to like stay down there. And it's tough to fit her into the more movable, wide open system that Washington wants to play with the offensive personnel they have.
Rowan took my things I was going to use to back cleanup with. I was like, I had the box score up. I was like, Jesus Christ, everyone up here is like 35 plus minutes. Hannah Sines played 39 minutes.
Mhm.
Um, and then it's Tyra, yeah, with the 18, and poor Devin with 4. And the only recorded stat for Devin is a turnover, which, ouch. Yeah, no, I mean, I think my biggest thing I want to touch on with this before we talk more about the backcourt. Um, is just like what I talked about last week, and we all talked about it, um, was the worry about your non-guards going forward. Because again, as I mentioned last week, you do have Nina Kane coming in. Bryn McGoy is listed as a forward. Fine. Who the hell is playing in the post? Who is taking up what Delia Daniels is doing right now for you? Like obviously the transfer portal is a thing. Da, 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 da. But like and you will get Olivia Anderson back next year. I don't know what. I remember there was the last question of the presser. I was like, "Oh, hey, Olivia Anderson, where is she?" She goes, "Oh, she's out for the season." I said, "Shit." I was like, "That was not what I was hoping to hear." I mean, 6'6", that's like one of your bigger players at that point, right? Um, so yeah, but again, it just goes back to my concern. Like I generally feel good about the program going forward with Savia. You've got another year of El Ladine. Devin Coppinger will learn a lot from the minutes that she's gotten this season as they've progressed. Chloe Briggs and Tegan Brown aren't old. Like they hopefully can take jumps for you, right? And then that recruiting class was a really strong recruiting class that's coming in next year. Whether it is Bryn McGoy, Sienna Harvey, Bryn Martin, Nina Kane, da 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 da. Like, but the paint is very concerning for me, especially when you've got a team like USC that has like anytime you're gonna play a team that has size, right? Like who what are we gonna do? So yeah, that was just I mean, it was really kind of emphasized in that game, at least in my opinion. So because again, generally otherwise I feel good about it. Like the program as a whole. We'll talk about the backcourt.
Hey, Charles.
Hey, Jen.
Hey, how about them Huskies?
Ooh, purple and gold, baby.
Yeah. When are you going to watch all those away games, though?
All those away games. There are a lot of them, and I was hoping to come to Rough and Tumble because this is the home of Circling Saddle Sports. If that's okay with you.
I think that's a great idea. Hope to see you all here.